In this episode, we're going to make a big improvement to how the Figaro rides and handles. Let's go. In our last episode, we focused on improving the performance of the Figaro's 1-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. Figaro hot rod parts don't exactly exist on Earth, so we whipped up a high-flow intake, designed and installed an alcohol injection system, and finally fabbed up a complete mandrel-bent high-flow turbo back exhaust system. All of this made for a faster, more responsive, and fun-to-drive Fig. Things were going great, until you came to a corner, that is. Whoa, feels like this thing's gonna tip over as it rolls and bounces through the turns. We can do better than this. Let's get to work. To get our suspension work underway, we'll get the Fig up in the air and remove the wheels. After looking around a bit, it's clear that all the Figaro suspension bits are original and have never been touched. Oh boy, that means every nut and bolt we're going to come across has had 26 years to become really stuck due to dirt and corrosion. So before we touch a single suspension part, I'm bringing out my favorite stuff, PB Blaster. For this job, I'll spray down every nut, bolt, and fitting that we'll be wrenching on and give it some time to work. For extra tough jobs, I'll spray it on a day or two before to really let it soak in. Okay, with that all soaking, let's take a look at what parts we'll be using today. A big concern with owning a rare Japanese classic like this is parts availability. The great news is that the Figaro shop is ready to help with everything you need. So I called up the friendly folks there and ordered up the goodies you see here. First up is a set of factory replacement KYB shock absorbers that are specifically designed to keep the comfortable ride of the Figaro intact. Next is a Figaro shop exclusive product, their rear trailing arm polyurethane bushing kit. This kit consists of 8 bushings and stainless steel inserts and the necessary lubricant. This replaces the old worn rubber bushings on the trailing arms and link bars on the Figaro's rear axle. I picked these up after seeing some very positive feedback online, so I can't wait to see how they perform in my Fig. I also ordered some replacement bolts, as it's common for suspension hardware to seize up after this many years on the job. This could be a tricky job without a proper guide, but thankfully the Figaro shop and the Figaro Owners Club have whipped up a terrific step-by-step instruction. So today I'll just be showing you the highlights of the job. If you want to see more, I'll put a link to the instructions in the description below. First, I'm going to tackle the front struts. Once the strut bolts are removed, I supported the hubs with a set of jack stands. With the top bolts removed, the strut assembly comes right out. Oh yeah, these are factory original and very worn out, I'm sure. To remove the shock absorber, I'm using a set of spring compressors. Once the spring is compressed, then the strut top hat can be removed and the shock can be slid out. Here's a look at the old and new struts. The new shocks came with instructions. I suppose I should look over those. Not sure. Is that language from Star Wars? What is that? With the new shock in place, the top hat assembly goes back on, the spring compressors are loosened, and the struts can go back in place. I torqued everything to spec according to the factory service manual and repeated this process for the passenger side. I love the excellent factory fit of the KYB shocks. I'll tighten and torque these wheels down later. Okay, onto the rear shocks and our bushing install. We've already soaked everything in PB Blaster penetrating oil, so let's start with the shocks. This process is very similar to the front struts, but simpler, as the assembly only uses one lower bolt and one nut up top in here in the trunk. Looking a little closer at the old stock shocks, you can see the telltale sign that they've been leaking oil and need replaced. Once the new ones were in place, I torqued down the bolts to spec. With the new rear shocks installed, it's time to tackle those bushings. First, we'll remove the stabilizer bar. Now we can remove both trailing arms and both anti-roll bar link arms. The instructions warned me of possible seized bolts back here due to age and time, and everything went smoothly until the passenger side lower arm. See that rubber bushing spinning around in there? That bolt is stuck. But what about the bolt in the other end? Same thing, rusted, stuck in place for good. Time to cut it out. Good thing we ordered those new replacement bolts from the Figaro shop. Alright, so here's a look at all of the rear suspension parts that we removed. If you've got rust on these parts, the instructions explain how to refinish them nicely. Thankfully, my Fig's parts are in good shape. Our next step is to press out those worn stock rubber bushings. I used my press for this, which was overkill given how old and loose-fitting they were. As you can see, the old bushings are badly cracked and misshapen, which allowed tons of unwanted movement, I'm sure. The poly unit looks like a true precision piece versus the worn-out stock bushing. Here's a look at one of the lower arms without its bushings. One important note, 2 of the bushings in the kit are slightly larger than the others, which is why having a good set of instructions is a lifesaver. To press the new bushings in, I'm going to use a simple method that has worked great for me over the years. I started by cutting a length of 1/2 inch all thread. Add a few nuts and washers and you have the tool you need to do the job. We'll start by lubing the bushing and the inner arm mounting hole with the special grease that came with the kit. A little goes a long way here. So here's how the tool we made goes together. Slowly tightening the nuts on either end presses the bushings in place. To make the job a bit easier, I added a hose clamp around the mounting hole to keep the bushing from wanting to pop out while being pressed in. We're all set up now, let's get to it. Now just repeat the process for each bushing. After the bushing is in place, add a little more grease and press in the metal insert so it's flush on either side. So here's the finished product. 8 poly bushings installed into our upper and lower trailing arms. Let's bolt them back in. Speaking of bolts, you can see why I chose to use the new ones from the Figaro shop on my lower arms. My upper arm bolts were in great shape, so I reused those. After reattaching everything according to the instructions, I torqued the bolts to spec. I'll recheck these after our first couple drives. There we go, all done. Oh, and I love that the Figaro shop chose black for these bushings. They blend in for a completely OEM look, unlike something like this, for example. Okay, let's bolt the wheels on and go for a drive. What's up, everybody? Here we are out cruising in the Fig on our very first test drive to see how our new suspension components are working out. Right off the bat, I can tell the ride is much more composed than it used to be. Before, it seemed like when I would go over bumps and imperfections in the road, it would just get the rear end all out of shape. You could feel bouncing and it would just feel kind of loose back there. And I guess I just sort of accepted that's the way this car was. But now that we've changed those things and totally removed that, oh, it's so much better to drive. Another thing I'm noticing is it's very quiet. I must have been getting some kind of rattling back there before because it's much more quiet. I've got the top up and it sounds great. Okay, here's the real test. We're about to go through some turns. You know, before, when you would come up to the turns, if you had any kind of speed going, it just felt like you were on two wheels. It was kind of terrifying. But now, here we go. Now I'm hucking it into this turn here. Oh, much better. You might hear my camera gear and stuff rattling around in here. I'm taking these big turns, it's kind of flying everywhere. I think if you would have told me before that a set of bushings would make this big of a difference in the ride and comfort of the car, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But after driving is believing. It was definitely worth the effort. Well, overall, I have to give the Figaro shop polyurethane bushings a huge thumbs up. Absolutely worth the effort and investment, and it has improved the ride and handling of the Figaro immensely. It'll make it so much more fun to ride around in with my family, especially when the roads get kind of rough around here. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and with that said, thanks again, folks. We'll see you next time.